Good morning. I'm here in part because of an award being given to President Carter, who I've known for close to 40 years. And what I want to do is take a little look back on history. The history of the 1970s, when we had an oil embargo. It was a big time in the world of energy, and things happened like the formation of the Association of Energy Engineers in 1977, the first year that Jimmy Carter was president. Now, when I was at EIA, I had a lot of people working for me, and we put out the models that projected future trends. We put out weekly data that would move the market, and I still keep up with those things. But as I have gone into the presidential library world and kept my interest in energy, I've tended to go back and look a little more carefully at some of these great historical events. I'm considered weird by some of my friends, but I spend many, many hours listening to every tape when Richard Nixon was discussing energy in the Oval Office. These were not known. They are very interesting conversations. I like to go back and read the diplomatic cables between the United States and Saudi Arabia that have now been declassified, and we can see what was actually being said at the time. I like to go back and look at the data, not just in like 5-year increments, but in monthly increments, to try to, again, figure out what was really happening. And as a consequence of that, I've tried to look at what I consider a myth of that period. And the myth sort of goes as follows. It says, we had this big oil embargo in 1973 and 1974, and this was a big deal. There were many states in the country where 50% of the gasoline stations had no gasoline at all. You can imagine what a shock that was to the American psyche. And so after this great event, many presidents have promised energy independence. And then the third part is, but we've never really done very much about it. And I argue that with that part, we've never done very much about it. And so I sort of made a list of some things that I thought had come out of that era that affect us today. And let me just go over this list. I think for some of you who are more or less of my age, these things will sound familiar to you. And for younger engineers, these are things that probably it's good to be aware of. So at the top of my list, little thing, right turn on red. Where did that come from? Well, you know, that didn't used to be legal. But after the oil embargo, people said, well, you know, we're consuming fuel when people are idling at a stoplight when they could very safely make a right turn. So under the energy legislation in 1975, state energy offices were tasked with trying to convince their states to pass right turn on red laws. So that's what we have today. Now on the other side of the coin, it used to be before the oil embargo that when you drove into a service station, someone would come out and fill your tank for you. They clean your windshield wiper and they check your oil levels. Maybe you could get some S&H green stamps. And if you went inside, they give you all the maps you want. Now today we don't need maps, of course, particularly these grandchildren that we're talking about. But it was kind of nice. But as prices escalated, people looked at a service station different. They wanted low price. Away went all these perks. Another thing that's often overlooked, we saw some data today that shows that oil use in electric generation is virtually negligible. I mean, if you take Hawaii out of the picture, it's almost nothing. In the middle 1970s, we got as high as 17% of our oil coming from, 17% of our electricity coming from oil. Big, big chunk. So those oil prices get passed through into electricity prices. The electric industry, with some encouragement from the government, backed out of oil generation, and it's not a factor today. So we're not, the electric industry is not contributing to our trade imbalance in oil. We got requirements for integrated resource planning by our utilities, which introduced the concept that energy efficiency should be treated as a source of energy, much as alternative energy. That was an outcome of that particular period. We got the idea of national appliance standards. They really didn't get put into force till later, but they were mentioned in the legislation of the 1970s, the idea that we should have codes for things like refrigerators and stoves and air conditioners. That came out of that period and is an important part, almost accepted today, of our broad national energy posture. When you go into a store, look for the Energy Star labels. However, it's pretty hard to buy an appliance that's less efficient than the one you had before, or that isn't more efficient, because we're gradually ratcheting up the standards. Insulation of buildings. Look at the difference before the 1970s and just what the whole concept was of insulating a building. At the time, it was introduced a lot of tax incentives to insulate better. With rising prices, there was a lot of financial incentive to want to do this. And it had a big impact in New England, where they don't use as much electricity or natural gas for home heating. They used heating oil. So the impacts for oil were huge by just something like insulation that we take for granted today. Another thing that we did was we decontrolled oil and gas prices. For many decades, the price of natural gas was controlled if it went into interstate commerce. This was something that no one was, or a lot of people weren't happy with, but the Supreme Court had said that this was required. And so in the 1970s, we began to phase out these natural gas prices, which are natural gas price controls, which were impeding the development of more efficient markets. Now, on the oil side, in 1971, President Nixon imposed oil price controls. President Carter started to phase those out, and President Reagan then went ahead and just totally eliminated them in 1981. So we're getting back to where prices can flow, for good or ill. Volatile markets can be a problem. We live in an age today where the price of oil is changing every minute. And maybe that's a good thing for the efficiency of the market. Maybe it's disconcerting from time to time. Another thing that was done during the 1970s was we had these great national energy labs. These labs were developed on the whole to develop atomic weapons and then civilian nuclear power. And that's pretty much what they did until the 1970s. But the Congress and presidents in the 1970s said, well, we've got a lot of other things in energy that we would like these labs to be working on. So they have opened up these labs to work in a more diversified way. So when the oil companies have this new 3D, and now if they're doing subsalt, even 4D seismology, a lot of that was developed in conjunction with our national labs.